Hello, and may the 4th be with you, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This is my yearly Star Wars movie review. Every May 4th, I release a new review on a Star Wars movie in release date order. So I've already done Star Wars A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and now it is on to Revenge of the Sith. So this is a special review this time around because some might be aware that Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, it's its 20th anniversary this year, and it just so happened to have a re-release in the theaters in late April when I'm recording this review, after I just saw it in the theaters earlier today. Because normally I had to watch them on DVD or Blu-ray, and this year I get to go into the theater and re-experience seeing Revenge of the Sith in the movie theater. And it was a really cool experience, experiencing it in the theater again. It's just a different experience, like particularly that opening scene where you see the big ships and all these battles. Like that was it's just more grand. You can make out more like tiny details and show that the whole thing was a lot more detailed that you can pick out in watching it in the big screen. And just overall, just the whole theater experience is really cool to get that again. Now, I will say, just getting back to my personal history, the first time I saw Revenge of the Sith, I was living in a small town on the coast of New Zealand, of the South Island of New Zealand, which is less populated. In fact, the west coast of the South Island is very sparsely populated. There's only a handful of small towns. I think the population of the town I lived in was like 4,000, 5,000, maybe, something like that. And so there were no movie theaters nearby. I mean, there was one movie theater with one screen in town, but they usually, because they only had one screen, they usually would get movies later, like a couple weeks after they were released, and I did not want to wait that long to see Revenge of the Sith. So I drove over to Christchurch, which is on the East Coast, so it's right across the island, although it's, skinny island, so it was maybe a 3-hour drive, 2.5-hour, 3-hour drive, so it wasn't like a huge drive. But now I made a whole trip out of it. In fact, I think I got someone to cover my shift at work. It was kind of a spur of the moment thing. And I was like, fuck, because it was released on the Wednesday. And I was like, let's go. Let's go out. And so I remember, and I was still married at the time. And I remember driving out with my wife and seeing Revenge of the Sith in Christchurch and making a whole sort of trip out of it and going out to nice restaurants and stuff and making a day out of being in Christchurch. But that's neither here nor there. It does. I think watching it now, though, in the theaters did bring back those memories of being married, which kind of affected me during the scenes with Padme and Anakin, because it was also I was also hearkening back to when I first saw this. It was an experience seeing it in the theater. Although I will say the theater I saw it in originally in Christchurch, because we went to really nice theater, it was a huge screen. Where this screen I just saw it in today was kind of small because it's not one of their more popular movies playing. They weren't expecting a huge crowd, I guess, so they put it in one of the smaller screens at my local Cineplex or whatever. But anyway, it was still good seeing it in the big screen once again. So have a couple thoughts on seeing Revenge of the Sith. I will say this is, and I'll get more into this when we get to my rating of it at the end of the video, but I'm pretty sure I can confidently say this is my second favorite Star Wars movie ever made. Which I know I got a lot of pushback from certain people, certain people I do live streams with. In particular, I remember Darren hating this movie and thought it was terrible. And I think, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I recall Alyssa saying something to the effect of, no prequel movie should be considered better than the original trilogy movie. Now, it's getting more common, particularly with all this prequel forgiveness with... Now, as I said, it's 20 years old, so you have the generation that grew up with the prequels are now sort of glorifying it and make them out to be way better than they actually are because they grew up with it. And so many of the people of that generation think that the prequels are better than the original series. Now, I talked about this, I think, original trilogy. It's not Star Trek, it's Star Wars, but the original trilogy. And I think I talked about this in one of the other May the 4th reviews that I've done already about how the original trilogy is just objectively better than the prequel. If you take any of the biases out, and to be fair, I'm not just saying the people who grew up with prequels have bias. The people who grew up with the original trilogy also, in my opinion, have a heavy bias as well, because that's what they grew up with. The Gen Xers and the sort of older millennials like myself, where the younger millennials grew up more with the prequels, and so they have a bias towards that. But if you can take away any of the biases, and I'm not even going to get into the whole Gen Z with the newer trilogy, with the sequel trilogy. Well, I'll cover this. I'll start covering that next year. That's a whole nother ball of wax. I don't even know if Gen Z is going to have a bias towards them. It's very possible. But anyway, taking away any biases, and if you look at it from an objective, filmmaking standpoint, not even what movie you prefer, and I talked about this before, you can look at something like Paul Blart Mall Cop and compare it to Shawshank Redemption and just say, objectively, Shawshank Redemption's a better movie. Now, there could be somebody out there who doesn't like the Shawshank Redemption. Personally, they find it a bit too boring. Maybe they find the prison scenes at the start too difficult to watch, and it's not their cup of tea. And they find it, I know it has a very happy ending, spoilers for that, but they find it too difficult to get through, how disturbing it is towards the start of the movie. And so they may not prefer to watch a movie like that, and they'd rather watch a movie like Paul Blart Mall Cop. I always use that as an example because that movie sucks so much. But anyway, maybe they find it funny. Maybe it fits their sense of humor and it's a good time, and they would rather spend their time watching that movie than watching Shawshank Redemption. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. They're welcome to their opinion. They shouldn't be put down because of their opinion. But if you look at it from an objective filmmaking, what's better as cinematography, better directing, better acting, better editing, better music, you look at it from an objective craft, creative, and writing, what's the better script writing, you look at it from an objective craft viewpoint, Shawshank Redemption is a far superior movie to Paul Blart Mall Cop. And it's the same thing with, maybe not to that degree, to be fair, but it is the same thing with the Star Wars trilogy. The original trilogy is just better than the prequels. Now, that's not just saying every aspect is better. For example, I think the prequels have better music, which I'll get into shortly. It has better fight choreography, better lightsaber fights, but Original trilogy's got better writing, better acting, better directing, better editing, and that sort of thing. And so I think, and just the writing is the most important thing. And I talked about this, and I think Phantom Menace, the review I did for that, is that the reason why the original trilogy is better than the prequels is because George Lucas had other creative minds involved in the creative process, other directors, other writers who he listened to, whereas in the prequels he kind of had this god complex where he surrounded himself with yes men and pretty much had full control, and there was not as much collaboration involved. And as good as George Lucas is, because he is the mastermind of Star Wars, he needs that cooperation, that sort of someone who will keep him in check and bounce the ideas and take his good ideas and reject his bad ones. Whereas if he has full God mode, then you see a lot. It's just not as good. And I think that is an objective truth. And again, that's not getting into the sequels. So not even getting into that yet. But all that being said, so I have acknowledged that the original trilogy is better than the prequels trilogy. I disagree that any movie of the prequel could not be better than any movie of the original trilogy. I think that Revenge of the Sith is better than A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. Not Empire, because that's the best Star Wars movie. And you can refer back to my reviews of A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, where A New Hope is to me, that was a problem of too much studio interference. The studio was trying to make it more of a digestible, like, run-of-the-mill, like, family-friendly fantasy good versus evil adventure. It had and even Lucas himself was very inspired by things like Flash Gordon, and that was very obvious in that first one, A New Hope. And it was the good versus evil, and it comes off as a bit too simplistic and a bit too hokey for my personal taste. And again, this is getting more into my taste, I should make this clear. I'm not talking about objectivity here. Like, I'm not saying Revenge of the Sith is objectively a better movie than A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. I'm saying it's my personal opinion, my personal taste. So I'm not saying it's objectively better. I am saying I prefer it because in the case of A New Hope, it is too, it's too Flash Gordon-y. It's too hokey. So it was too much studio interference. Where Return of the Jedi was not the case, it was too much studio interference because Lucas, like both Empire and Return, were pretty much done on Lucas's own dime, and then Fox kind of reimbursed him for some of it and did the distribution, but he pretty much had to front all the money himself, and it was actually very, very tight budgeted because of that. And he couldn't, like, for example, I talked about in Return of the Jedi, he originally wanted Steven Spielberg to direct it, but George Lucas got kicked out of the guild for not including opening credits at the start of Empire, and so he wasn't allowed, so Steven Spielberg wasn't allowed to work with George Lucas because he wasn't a guild member and stuff like that, and so he had to get some foreign German, I think, director that nobody heard of to direct Return of the Jedi. Now, I'm not saying that's why it sucked. Or no, Return of the Jedi didn't suck, to be clear, but I'm not saying that's why it wasn't as good. But you can kind of tell. And George Lucas has, sort of put this in interviews and in memoirs that it was a very bad time for him when they were making Return of the Jedi. I think that's when his marriage fell apart and he was tired because of all of the legal fights he was having and having to produce and run his own studio in order to make the movie. Like, it was too much. Like, when he first started Empire, he was like all in gung-ho, and this is when he said he wanted to do 3 prequels and 3 sequels. And then after, when it got to Return of the Jedi, like the news, I remember when I was young, I was reading those articles like, oh, there's going to be 6 more Star Wars movies. But by that stage, Lucas was overwhelmed with everything and running his own studio. He was like, no, fuck this. I am not doing any more Star Wars movies. Obviously, he would eventually change his mind when it came to the prequels, but it took from 83 to 99. Well, 99 when it was released. It was started being made earlier than that, to be fair. I think 97, but still. It took nearly 16 years until we finally got around to doing the prequels again. And I remember when this film, Revenge of the Sith, was first released, he even said, I don't want to do a sequel trilogy. It's not going to happen. Flat out not. Because I remember after seeing it, I was so psyched. Like, this is amazing. So now all we need is a trilogy to take place after Return of the Jedi. But then he would flat out like shoot that down and says, no way. That is not happening. I just wanted to do these prequels in order to finish the story. Now, in my opinion, it's done. And then he was talking about doing a TV series, which apparently started to be made. Like, they hired Ronald D. Moore. Ronald D. Moore was talking about this in an interview. They hired him and several other writers, and they were working with George Lucas, and they wrote scripts for this TV show, and they started, like, pre-production on it, but then George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, and so it never got made. But that's an interesting... Because I remember hearing him saying he wants to do all these TV shows, and it just never happened. And the next thing I knew, Disney owned Star Wars. But anyway, that's, again, another story. Getting back to Return of the Jedi. All those troubles, I think, do show up. It does look like there wasn't as much effort into it. And you can tell, like, actors like Harrison Ford, for example, he didn't really want to do it either. He wanted Han Solo to be killed off in this film and was kind of pissed off when George Lucas wouldn't do it. And so you can tell that he's kind of phoning it in a little bit. And there's a lot of Return of the Jedi that does seem like, for example, the whole Ewoks thing. It was kind of ill-advised. And so and this is moments that you can tell that not as much effort is being put into it. That being said, I still love Return of the Jedi because it's, it's the amazing aspect of it is definitely the whole Darth Vader and Luke confrontation and Luke trying to appeal to his father's good side. Like, that still holds up. Like, that's amazing. And there's other parts of that movie that work as well. Like I don't like the Ewoks, but the Battle of Endor is still entertaining. It's still good, and the whole, second Death Star attack, it's a bit repetitive, but it's also entertaining enough. So I gave that movie an 8 out of 10 for reference. So I still like it. But I think Revenge of the Sith is better. I think it's better in Return of the Jedi, better in New Hope, because it does have flaws, which I will get to, but to me it's one of the most, maybe the most, I should say, even more so than Empire, emotionally impactful films. Like, I feel like emotionally, like, devastated after watching this film, and really emotionally, like, involved in it, and it really affects me. And it's also got really strong, like, social commentary as well, which I always loved. And I talked about this a little bit in Attack of the Clones when I covered that movie. As much as I don't like the prequels, I think that they're smarter in terms of showing a more dynamic, more complex story simply than good versus evil. Now, I've heard like interviews with George Lucas saying that it's still his intention of good versus evil, and that's present here where you see Palpatine, who's portrayed as, the devil. He's portrayed as evil, and that's fine. Like, I still think that it is more complex, and it gets into the complexities of just how people can be manipulated and how not black and white, how gray situations. Because if you look at it, the story of the prequels in black and white, you think, oh, it's the evil separatist versus the good republic. But it turns out that that's not the case at all. That both the separatists and the republic are both being manipulated by the evil Palpatine in order to distract people and to give up their freedom so he can acquire more power. Which, again, is a lot more true to life and a lot more complex of a story than simply a rebellion trying to throw over a fascist state. So here's the thing, though, about Revenge of the Sith, is that, God, what is it? Something I sort of came to a conclusion to as I was watching this movie is that you don't even need to watch the first two films in the prequel trilogy, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Like, you can just skip them entirely. In fact, before I talked about Machete Order, how Machete Order was A New Hope, followed by Empire Strikes Back, and then you go back and you watch Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and then you watch Return of the Jedi, so you skip over Phantom Menace. I actually think, to me, the preferred recommended order, if anyone ever asked me, I think the order I would recommend is A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Revenge of the Sith, and Return of the Jedi. That's it. You don't even, like, I was noticing as I was watching this film that yes, you get more of the references if you've seen the first two, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Like, you understand the Obi Wan and Anakin relationship better. You get the Dooku references and stuff like that, and the other references. And Padme, you understand their forbidden romance more and stuff like that, how they married in secret. But even so, I think most of that you can pick up, like, on your own from watching this. I think any vital, important information from the story, like, you can glean from the movie itself. I think this movie is pretty standalone. And ultimately, I think the first two movies, and I talked about this when I covered them, are just setups. They're just setting up this movie. I really think that a trilogy was unnecessary, that they could have just told the story in one movie. And I think this movie, first of all, I think is the only one worth watching from the prequels, although I thought Attack of the Clones was fine. Phantom Menace was terrible. Sorry, I'm standing by that. But, Revenge of the Sith is the only one worth watching. And you don't even need to watch the first two to fully grasp it. Like, I think it would actually make more sense to go, because anyone who tells you should start with the prequels, like do it in chronological order, is the wrong. Because it's very clear that the prequels are assuming you have prior knowledge of Star Wars. They're assuming you know about the Force, you know about the general setting. It's assuming you know who Darth Vader is. So when they introduce Anakin, like, oh my God, it's Anakin! Like, and if you're watching it for the first time and you're starting with the first one, it's not going to really click. And so I think you need to start with A New Hope, because that's the one that world built, that explains the world, explains the Force, it explains all this. So I think starting in chronological order for anyone watching it for the first time makes no sense whatsoever. You start with A New Hope. Then you do Empire Strikes Back, a direct sequel, and then it ends with the big shocking, Luke, I just misquoted. I'm sorry. No, I am your father. There we go. Correct quote. Yeah, it ends with that, and then you go back and okay, what does this mean that Darth Vader is Luke's father? Oh my God, what does that mean? You go back, you watch Revenge of the Sith. You see a young Anakin Skywalker, and you see him at the start of the movie being this great rebel leader. He's not even this great rebel leader in Attack of the Clones. That's another reason why it's not necessary. Like, you get it with this film. You see him be a great rebel leader, a great, friend to Obi Wan, and then you slowly see his turn to the dark side, and it ends with the birth of Luke and Leia, and setting up for A New Hope, and so everything comes full circle. And then you go back, watch Return of the Jedi, and then it shows Luke appealing to his father, which means a lot more to you now, because now you have the backstory of who Anakin was before he turned evil. So yeah, that's that's what I think. As I said, leaving aside the sequel, not even getting into that ball of wax. But as far as the first two, that would be my recommendation to anyone. Like, don't even bother with Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones. I don't think you need to. I think it's pretty self-contained, and really, I think Lucas didn't even need to bother with an entire trilogy. He could have just done one movie, but it's just he wanted to have the symmetry or whatever. But I don't know. I think, and I talked about this in the first two, like, they shouldn't have started all the way back with Anakin as a child. Like, that was a complete waste of time. You start with Attack of the Clones, and then you do a Clone Wars movie instead of having to wait to do a cartoon later on, and then you do Revenge of the Sith. Then it actually could have been worthy of being a trilogy. But anyway, that's getting into that. But yeah, so Luke and Leia being born. So apparently, and I just saw this and I didn't know this, the original idea was Padme would survive this movie and she would go off to live on Alderaan with Leia and help raise her. And the implication would be that she would die when Leia is young. That way would match up with what Leia said in Return of the Jedi, that, my mother died when I was quite young, and I remember her always being really sad. Real mother, by the way. She did specify she wasn't talking about her adoptive mother. And so now that doesn't make any sense, and a lot of people called that out. Hey, what the hell? This doesn't make sense. But apparently that was Lucas's original plan, was to do that so it would match up. But the reason why he changed his mind and had her die at the end of the movie, because he thought that her death needed to be seen on screen. Because if they had her survive the movie, then her death would occur off screen in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Little did he know Disney would probably make a prequel that actually showed her death if that was the case. But he didn't know that at the time. I'll get into all these prequels that fill in the gap between. There's so much material now that fills in the gap in between Revenge and A New Hope. But anyway, I'll get to that. But anyway, so yeah, at the time he thought if they didn't show her death here, then no one would see it, and it's too important of a death to just not show. So that's why. Now, while I was watching the movie, I came up with headcanon to kind of explain why Leia said that line. Because she's a Force user, and so she could have, the Force sort of memory of being a baby and seeing her mother right before she died. And so maybe that's what she was referring to. Although she did specifically say I was quite young, which is an understatement if she was just newly born. So, the mental gymnastics don't really match up. But hey, you do what you gotta do. But it's a rewrite from Lucas. But anyway, there's other things that he did try to match up. But this gets into, for me, the biggest flaw of the movie is the ending where they're trying to set up A New Hope. It doesn't really make any sense. Like some of the things. Like, for example, like the thing with them giving C-3PO to Captain Antennes or whatever his name is, and saying, "Oh, wipe his memory." Like, that's obviously just done so they can explain why C-3PO doesn't recognize Luke or any of these other people. But it's very contradictory. It does seem to come kind of out of nowhere, but it doesn't contradict anything in the prequel movies. You're like, all right, fine, that's just a silly thing they do to set it up. But the thing that bothers me the most, that seems the most sort of inconsistent, is how come Yoda says to Obi Wan, "Oh, we need to go, destroy the Sith," and he goes to fight Emperor Palpatine. He shows up and says, your rule is over, Emperor, not short enough it was. And so they have this massive fight where Yoda nearly gets the better of him several times, but he ends up like throwing Yoda down in the pit, and he's standing up there laughing, going, "Ha ha ha ha." And Yoda just runs away, and they're like, "Oh, we'll find him." And I'm like, okay, so let's assume that Yoda was too hurt to go back and attack him some more, which I don't think really fit. I don't really see how he had the lower hand. Seems like, but let's assume this for the sake of giving the benefit of the doubt. Yoda is no condition to go back and fight Emperor right that second. So why didn't he go somewhere, recuperate, regain it, especially once he learned that Obi Wan survives his battle with Darth Vader and defeated him? Why doesn't he say, okay, so now the two of us need to go back and kill the Emperor? Yoda got in there pretty easily. It seems like, I guess you could say they get the element of surprise because the Emperor didn't know Yoda was alive, but it still seems like they would be able to find a way to go back and attack the Emperor, even if it took years. Like, they could really plan it. But instead, he's like, "Oh, into exile I must go." I'm like, fucking why? Like, this is the thing that bothers me the most. And of course, we know the real reason why is because it needs to match up with the original trilogy. But it actually makes no fucking sense why, after one defeat, which he wasn't even defeated all that badly, he'd be like, "Oh, I failed," or Yoda, so it has to be, "Failed have I. Into exile I must go." I'm like, what the why? Like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, that's the thing that bothers me the most, that he goes to Dagobah and he just sits on the planet, sits on his ass and does nothing, except he learns how to commune with the dead so he can do that when he dies. But whoop-de-fucking-do. Why doesn't he try to kill the Emperor? Like, this makes no sense. It really bothers me. And the other thing is, leaving aside, how is it that Obi-Wan, Owen, and his wife, was her name Beru, how they age 40 years within a 20-year span? Or an 18-year span, they age 40 years. How does that happen? I guess the Force is working against them or something. I don't know. But leaving that aside, a lot of people pointed out, so they're hiding Luke and Leia from Anakin, from Darth Vader. They don't want him to know that his children are still alive. And that's why they even made it look like Padme was still pregnant when they paraded her dead body during her funeral. So why is Obi-Wan giving Luke to Anakin's adoptive brother or brother-in-law or however brother-in-law I think is the type that Anakin knows? Like, why you give it straight to seems like he would be able to figure that out. My brother-in-law has his adoptive son. Maybe he's my son. Like, I don't know. It seems a bit ridiculous. And that they're hiding right in Tatooine where he was growing up. But, again, the real reason is because it has to match up with the original trilogy. But that one doesn't bother me as much as the whole Yoda saying, I'm into exile, I must go. Like, that is the thing that bothers me the most about this movie. And so I want to try to address some of these other complaints. So one of the complaints I had mentioned about Revenge of the Sith earlier is General Grievous and how I didn't really like him. And he came off as kind of like a goofy cartoon character. And it was definitely Star Wars like trying to maintain that sort of kids vibe sort of thing. Like, oh, I'm evil. He's kind of like a two-dimensional thing. But, when I watched it this time around, like, I didn't have that big of an issue with Grievous. I mean, sure, he is kind of silly. He is kind of two-dimensional. And they have Dooku, so why not use him? It seems like they made such a big deal out of Dooku in Attack of the Clones, and then he just gets killed off immediately at the start of this movie. But it does serve a purpose. Like, the way his death, the way they killed him, it was like definitely very, symbolic of, Palpatine trying to manipulate. Well, not even symbolic is not the right word. It is, in essence, Palpatine trying to manipulate Anakin into turning to the dark side. So I think it's necessary. Maybe they could have saved it for the middle of the movie rather than have it at the start, but then that kind of destroys the whole structure. So, okay, I'm willing to give them this one. And I thought that it's not my favorite aspects of the movie, but it was okay. Like, I didn't totally hate it. The fight scenes between Obi Wan and Grievous. Like, they were kind of silly, like, you fool, I was trained in the Jedi arts by Count Dooku. And I'm like, Dooku, you mean that dude that we just killed? Like, ooh, I'm terrified. But anyway, so no, it was a little bit silly. But it did feel kind of Star Wars-y. It does feel typical to Star Wars, and it was kind of an exciting battle. It wasn't like the point of the film either. Like, the point of it was to get Obi-Wan away from Coruscant when the shit went down with Palpatine and Darth Vader, and have him in the place where he would survive. And also signifies the end of the war, because they said the war will end when Grievous is killed. And so it kicked, like, Grievous's death sort of kicked the whole thing in order. So it made sense to have a main character like Obi-Wan be there. And as I said, it also does the purpose of not having him around when Anakin is turned, so that they have to meet later. So because of all the plot functions, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's not the most exciting things, but I have less of an issue with it than I used to. Now, the other thing is the romance scenes between Padme and Anakin, which I hear a lot of people cite for one of the reasons this movie's not very good or flat out sucks. And honestly, like, okay, so I gotta admit, some of this dialogue is still not being written well. It's not Shakespeare. It is not the best dialogue, but it's also not the worst. And more to the point, it's not as bad as Attack of the Clones. That romantic dialogue was clearly much worse, and the whole sort of falling in love felt so fake and artificial. Whereas I feel in this film, even if the dialogue isn't always the sharpest or the best, I believe the romance a lot more. Like their romance, the underlying feelings that they had for each other, and I think the actors actually did a really good job. I think Hayden Christensen improved in this film, even though I have heard a lot of people still trash his acting in this film. I think that he has gotten better. I think there was a few moments that didn't work, but I think that had more to do, again, with the dialogue. But I think that, like, I felt more emotionally connected to their relationship. And the music is what really sold it. But I'll touch on the music a little bit later. But yeah, the music absolutely sold it. So I think the romantic scenes actually do, even though, again, not Shakespeare, but I think it works a lot better in this film than it did in Attack of the Clones. And it does... much more emotionally involved. Yeah, other than that, like, this is one line my sister likes to always make fun of when Yoda says, "Not if anything to say about it I have." I don't care. That line's fine to me. I don't have any issues with it. I don't know the big deal about that line. That's fine. It's worse than other Star Wars movies. I'm fine with it. And I don't know. I just don't have I get why some people really hate this movie. Like, I think, again, there is some silliness to it. Like, and that major fight scene they had at the start of the movie, which I love, is amazing. There's silliness thrown in there, like battle droids going, "Uh-oh," and, just random silly nonsense. But... and it is, they do it more in the prequels than they do in the original trilogy. Like Lucas trying to say, "Oh, this is always movies about kids. All these grown men that think that, oh, they're ruining my picture, but it's always meant for kids." Actually, not true. Prequels is objectively more silly than the original trilogy, especially the first two. This one definitely toned it down way more. Like, for example, Jar Jar is barely in this. He makes a silent cameo, and that's it. And it doesn't. And Attack of the Clones had C-3PO kind of take Jar Jar's place as the dumb, annoying comic relief, and they don't have that in this movie. So this is really toned down. The silliness and kids, cartooniness and kids thing is severely toned down in this film compared to the first two. In fact, I would say it's less than the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. I think Return of the Jedi is more sort of childlike than this movie. But you still have those elements. You still have the occasional, as I said, Grievous is kind of your stereotypical cartoon villain. "Oh, you fool! You will meet your doom." Like, yeah, it's very sort of cartoonish villain, one note, sort of, and the random stuff in the background with the battle droids going, "Uh-oh," and like shooting each other or whatever. Like, but that doesn't bother me. It's not like a deal breaker. It's not that big of a deal to me. I think overall, the themes and the emotional impact that they tackle in this film, particularly the character story of Anakin, like, I think they hit that right on the money. Like, Attack of the Clones, they made it too obvious, like, it was that this was the number one candidate to turn to the dark side. Like, they didn't do a really good job. They portrayed a much more dynamic character in this film, that he starts off being like the sort of champion of the Republic, of the Jedi, but you see that he's a little bit conflicted, and you also you buy his turn more. Like, for example, I love the scene with Anakin and Obi Wan, when Obi Wan's going off to fight Grievous, and they say goodbye, and they're like. And you see their friendship in that first battle sequence. You see how much they depend on each other. And Obi-Wan saying, like, "Oh, Anakin's like, I saved your life 10 times. He was like, "Oh, 9 times. That one time there that didn't count." Like, you see the sort of love they had for each other. And I love that scene where they're saying goodbye. And Obi Wan's like, look, you're like a son to me, and I think you're a great Jedi. You just got to be patient. Like, I really care for you. And Anakin returns those feelings. It's like, yeah, you're this great mentor, and I really care about you. And then the next time they see each other, they're trying to kill each other, and you buy that progression though. You buy in between the stuff that happens in between. You sort of buy the how those turn of events happen, and it's very emotional. And this is the one thing that the Obi Wan series, where I wasn't a huge fan of that, this is the one thing they played off of. That was the one good thing about that show, is they played off of how these two used to love each other, and then things turned. And I think that was really emotionally powerful. As I said, I actually love the dynamic between Padme and Anakin. How Anakin's fear that Padme would die became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and he was actually, what he did to try to prevent her death actually caused her death. Like, that's very tragic in a way, but also the tragedy comes when that scene at the end when she's saying, you're going in a place where I can't go, and you're breaking my heart. Like, those were emotional. Like, that really, really hits really hard. Oh yeah, I forgot another complaint though that I had about the ending. Another thing that bothered me was the whole, Padme lost the will to live. That's stupid. Like, I hate it when any movie or TV show does the whole thing. Like, they lost the will to live. Or, they had to fight in order to survive. Like, that's not how medicine works. Like, I don't know. That came off as really goofy. I heard there was a fan theory, headcanon, saying that Palpatine was sort of sending the dark side of the Force to her and sort of causing her to lose the will to live. To me, that's like the fans trying to headcanon stuff in order to fix plot holes, which is clearly a plot hole. It's clearly ridiculous. That's another thing that bothered me about the ending. Is the whole lost the will to live. I think they would have been better off having her survive and say, she's going to help raise Leia, and just imply that she dies later on, and wait for Disney Plus to make a show that shows her die. But anyway, like that, I wish they would have done that. And also, the way she was like, Luke, Leia, like, did she already have those names picked out? Like, and either way, that was like very sort of fan servicey. Look, it's young Luke. In case you didn't know, this is Luke Skywalker. Like, yes, we can figure that out. We don't have to hear her say Luke in there. But anyway, so that aspect also bothered me. But as I said, like, I think the emotional sort of journey of Anakin's turn, I totally bought. And again, it's self-contained. You don't even need those other two stupid movies. And the tragedy of Obi Wan having to sort of, in his mind, kill his protege, the person he thought of as a son, and it's like, I loved you, and how tragic that was. I think they really sold that moment. Oh, and not to mention the epic lightsaber battle, which is like 1 billion times better than anything they had in the original trilogy. Some people said, I've heard people complain about this. Is another complaint I heard people say, like, it's too choreographed. It seems like it's so fake, and it goes on for too long, and it's over the top. And these people are objectively wrong. I'm sorry that they are, but they are. It's amazing. It needs to be grand. Like, it needed to be this grand, and that's why it's so much better. And they do it with such emotion. Like, you feel like, Anakin's anger. You feel Obi-Wan's, like, how broken up he is and having to do, like, the tragedy in it, and it drives this, like, very grandiose, like going on like over top of the lava and on these little wires and then jumping on these tiny little droids. Like, it's very intense. Then there's the whole high ground thing, which I've heard so many. There's been so many memes about that now. And some people, pointed out that Obi Wan, like, killed Darth Maul in Phantom Menace, even though Darth Maul had the high ground. But I heard this headcanon, which I hadn't heard before, that Obi-Wan learned from that experience and knew that Anakin would not have the skills to pull off what he pulled off, and also knew that Darth Maul underestimated him and that he was not going to underestimate Anakin, and so that he would be able to force it. But that is definitely headcanon. I think the writers forgot about the Phantom Menace. That whole I have the high ground thing seems it's a little unearned, a little silly. I watched this earlier today. I watched this animated video on YouTube of, or maybe it was Facebook, something online, where they did a Star Wars What If, and they showed like Anakin right before, Obi-Wan saying, don't try it, I have the high ground, and Anakin does it anyway, but he does manage to kill Obi-Wan. Like, I think in the actual movie he tries to flip over Obi-Wan to have an even higher ground, but Obi-Wan manages to swat him in the air. But I think in this version, he doesn't try to go over Obi-Wan. Instead, goes in front of him and like stabs the lightsaber right through his chest and manages to kill him. And then this shows Anakin returning to Darth Sidious, and he was like, "Oh, my apprentice, you returned." And Anakin goes right up to him, and he's like, "Here's your lightsaber." And Anakin's like, "Oh, thank you," and just stabs him and kills him and becomes the Emperor. Now, I don't know if that's the way events would have turned out, but that's an interesting sort of what if to think about. I guess in this scenario, Darth Vader would become the Emperor, and he would never have that, that helmet and that outfit. He would always be Anakin or look like Anakin, but really he would be Darth Vader, and he would become the Emperor, I suppose, and rule the galaxy. And maybe in this example, Padme would never die of a broken heart, and he would try to get her back or whatever. I don't know. Interesting. It would be an interesting thing to explore. But anyway, that's kind of getting sidetracked. Let me get into the political commentary, which is actually, to be honest, part of the reason why I love this movie. Now, George Lucas talked about how when he created A New Hope, that his idea, inspiration was Nixon, and how Nixon was grabbing more power and becoming kind of authoritarian and like sort of eroding the democracy that the U.S. had. But when he didn't say out loud, particularly at the time Revenge of the Sith was released, but it was fucking obvious to anyone with eyes, is that he was making commentary on George W. Bush. At the time, George W. Bush was conducting illegal wars and torturing people and eroding personal freedoms with the Patriot Act and stuff like that, and was turning U.S. a bit more authoritarian. And it's very obvious that this was commentary on that, particularly with lines like Anakin, telling Obi-Wan, "Oh, you're either with me or you're against me," and Obi-Wan saying, "Only the Sith deal in absolute," which is a direct paraphrase of George W. Bush's infamous line of "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." And this is kind of commentary saying, well, that's actually an evil, fucked up thing to say, Mr. Bush. So it was direct, and also a lot of the things that the Emperor said about how, we're protecting democracy and stuff, were really paraphrasing stuff coming out of the Bush administration. So, I think it's and that was actually very brave, because this movie was made in a time where the Iraq War was super popular, and George W. Bush got reelected, and he was still, a lot of the mainstream was still totally on board with the war, and you were seen as sort of an outcast if you were against it. And of course, shortly thereafter, the tide would turn, where everyone, their mother, was against the war. They realized too late what some of us knew from the very fucking beginning, that it was an illegal war and that he was eroding democracy. But it took the majority of the American public, including a lot of Democrats, too long to figure this shit out. And it's very obvious. So it was brave, actually, commentary to make during that time when it was very unpopular. It was a bit more popular by the time it came out, but still, the Iraq War was still over, for the most part, still popular at the time. Still, most Americans supported it. So it was still, although it's the movie's released worldwide, and the rest of the world was pretty much against it, except for, America's coalition of the willing, which was like UK and a bunch of tiny random countries nobody gave a shit about. Like all the other major countries in the world, were against it. But anyway, as far as America goes, it was still very supported. And so now they're re-releasing it now in 2025, a movie that warns about a leader who tries to turn a liberal democracy into an authoritarian dictatorship. I wonder why that might be relevant nowadays. I don't know. It's just it must be a wild coincidence and has nothing to do with modern times anyway. Anyway, yeah. And this is what I'm saying though about how this movie's smarter than even Empire, is that it has that deeper meaning behind it. Also, the character emotional journey, but also the commentary, the comparison to historical events, and that applies to even modern events. As I said, this movie came out 20 years ago, and it's relevant, just as relevant back then, now as it was back then. And that's sure something that Lucas couldn't predict. It's just a sign of how history repeats itself. And how this is also based, because Lucas would outright say, this is based off of historical events, and like the French Revolution and Nixon and things further back in, Romans or whatever. But, because he doesn't want to outright say, it's about George W. Bush. But you can fucking tell. Like, it's very obvious. And then because it's such a common occurrence of how, because it happens throughout the world all the time, where liberal democracies will turn into authoritarian dictatorships. And it just so happens to be extremely relevant on this re-release. But anywho, so the other thing that I kept thinking about as I was watching this film today was all of the Disney Plus shows and stuff that take place around this time or after. You have the last 4 episodes of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I mean, the whole Clone Wars show takes place, in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. But the last 4 episodes occur concurrently with this movie. And here's the thing about that, is that I told you that Revenge of the Sith is my second favorite Star Wars movie. But if you considered those last 4 episodes of Clone Wars its own movie, and it does kind of feel like a movie, that might be my second favorite. It might just slightly edge out Revenge of the Sith, even though I know that it's just mainly just piggybacking off of Revenge of the Sith and showing you the alternate sort of what else was occurring, but it doesn't have all these flaws that Revenge of the Sith has. So I might like it even slightly better. So that might actually be my favorite movie, but it's technically not a movie, so I can't call it that. But I did keep thinking about how this adds, the whole Clone Wars show like added depth to Anakin's character and really fleshed him out more, and it made, like, if you watch the Clone Wars show first before watching this movie, this movie would have way more impact. And also, those last 4 episodes that happen side by side, like, it's really enhances the experience of watching this movie again. And then you have Bad Batch, which takes place right after this, and that I think I'm less sort of impressed with. I wasn't a huge fan of Bad Batch overall, but it does show you like how this evil empire is forming and how like hopeless that is. And then there's the Obi Wan show, which I wasn't the biggest fan of. In fact, I kind of keep forgetting that it exists. But it should have been a movie. It was originally planned to be a movie. But then because Solo, a Star Wars story, did so terribly, they thought, we can't do another movie prequel about a main character. But they're like, Mandalorian and all these Disney Plus shows are being very successful. Let's make it a Disney Plus show instead. And it feels that it should have been a movie. It feels stretched out too long, and it's really not that necessary. However, I do like how it does bridge the gap successfully. It's necessary to bridge the gap between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope as far as the Obi Wan and Anakin story goes, because if their little tepid confrontation and A New Hope doesn't seem like a worthy follow-up or a proper follow-up to the epic battle they had in Revenge of the Sith, so this actually makes more sense. And particularly the confrontation that they had, it was great. They had Hayden Christensen play Darth Vader again, and this is when he says your friend Anakin is dead, and this is what he tells Luke. So it actually helps bridge the gap in that regard. I still think it should have been a movie, though. I don't know how necessary it is to see a young Leia, but yeah. And it also makes clear that there's plenty of like Jedi or people with Force powers who survive Order 66, but it also shows what the Empire is doing to try to hunt them all down. And this actually makes sense, because I gotta be honest, when I first saw shows like Rebels and then Ahsoka's appearance in Mandalorian, like I thought it was kind of defying continuity, because Revenge of the Sith made it pretty clear that all the Jedi were wiped out except for Obi-Wan and Yoda, and so I was like, they're kind of changing canon a bit to have it so these other Jedi survive. But when I watched it again today, I thought, actually, they made a point of having Obi-Wan and Yoda go to the Jedi Temple, and they said, we had to, X out the symbol because there'll still be Jedi stragglers out there. We don't want them to fall into the trap. And so they did. They canceled the signal. And, I guess at the time I was thinking, well, that was a waste of time because we know all the Jedi are dead already. But it actually makes a lot of sense that it wasn't a waste of time, that they did in fact save a few Jedi who were out there. What's his face, Kanan from Rebels, and I don't know what did they. Well, we know how Ahsoka survived Order 66. That was something different, but other random Jedi's like we see hunted down here in this Obi-Wan series, like Yeah, so it actually, I changed my mind on that. I think, especially after watching it again, I was like, no, actually, it makes sense. Like, they were just, the way that Obi Wan is telling Luke in A New Hope makes it sound like all of the Jedi were wiped out, and that's certainly how they probably intended it to be originally, but you could take it as the Jedi Order was wiped out. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single Jedi in existence died, so I think it actually tracks now. Then you have Rebels, which is more closer to A New Hope, but it's still pre A New Hope. And then you have what else is there? Andor, which season 2 is still airing as I'm recording this. So I'm not sure how that will end, but it's probably gonna lead into Rogue One, which occurs right before A New Hope, sort of setting up A New Hope. But it's interesting because I didn't realize until I just watched the video today that, well, there was a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith that featured Mon Mothma, and she was there at a meeting with Senator Organa and a few others, and it was kind of the origins of the rebellion. It's a shame they deleted it, but what I didn't know is that was the first time that actress portrayed Mon Mothma, and apparently they had the same actress voice her in Rebels and was there? I thought there was another show that voiced her. Did she appear in anything other than Rebels? Maybe no. I don't know. Rebels and something. and then and it was the same actress who played her in Andor and Ahsoka. And I didn't realize that that was all the same actress. Like, I knew they got the same one for Andor and Ahsoka. Like, I recognized her. But I didn't realize it was the same one who's voiced her in Rebels and also played her in the deleted scene in this movie. I did not know that. And because she does a really good job in Andor. Like, they make her character very complex and give her a lot to do in Andor. In fact, it was kind of hard for me to reconcile this being the same character who's in Ahsoka, which is a much more sort of, goofy, silly show than Andor. Not in a bad way. I actually prefer Ahsoka, but that's another topic entirely. But yeah, no, there's like so much things that they input and they fill in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, and I'm sure there will probably be more. And I just was thinking about that during, while watching it, particularly the Clone Wars thing that occurs side by side with Revenge of the Sith. Like, kept thinking of like, oh, what is Ahsoka up to right now? And how does Anakin like to feel about it? What's he thinking about Ahsoka? But anyway, that's all stuff they made up after this movie anyway. And by the way, just so I'm clear, I still think it's because, especially in this movie, watching them say that, oh, Anakin, you're not a master. We grant you can be on the council, but you're not a master. And that's like a huge plot point, a huge sticking point, that he's not a master. Yet, for years now, he's had a Padawan. That's still, I don't care apparently they came up with some BS excuse in the original Clone Wars movie. I don't give a shit. It's just nonsense. It's not, that Padawan can't have another Padawan. Like, it makes no sense. They make it super clear that he's not a fucking master in this movie. And so, he shouldn't have a Padawan. Full stop. But anyway, I don't want to hear any BS excuses. Full stop. And I'm never going to change my mind about this. It makes no sense. But anyway, sorry. That's actually become like a popular meme. The whole thing with, I saw all these like jokes making fun of like Anakin not being a master, having Mace Windu like deny Anakin over and over again about how he's not a master, or make sort of jokes about a master or whatever. And I don't know, something like that, like playing Wheel of Fortune, the Clue being master and him being like, I don't get it, and Mace Windu being exactly, or stuff like that. So many jokes about how Mace Windu denied him master. I don't know why. The other thing, of course, that was very memeable was the whole Darth Vader going no at the end of the movie, and I will admit, that was a bit silly. And especially look at it as silly now after seeing all the memes about it and the videos playing on it and stuff. It is kind of over the top and it doesn't really fit well. But I kind of like the scene though, because it does show, I mean, the Emperor outright lies to Darth Vader and says, oh, you killed her. And he's like, no, that's full shit. She was still alive. Does make me wonder why he never doubted that and never sort of held it against the Emperor, saying he's obviously lying to me. But I do kind of like the scene because you could see like his power, like his anger shooting out and like destroying all this shit, and seeing how like happy the Emperor is. Just like, ah, yes, it's working. Like, it does show him as being like the master manipulator. But so it's not entirely terrible, but I still think that the no is kind of silly. But anyway, I remember once being on the message board and I asked, told people to ask me a yes or no question. And if the answer to the question was no, I would just post a clip of that Darth Vader going, no! That's mainly what I remember for. Anyway. So another very important thing I need to talk about is the music. As I mentioned, the music is absolutely amazing. In fact, I would go as far as to say, and maybe I have recency bias because I just saw this movie in the theaters, but I'm going to make the bold statement that this is the Star Wars movie with the best musical score. And here's why. Because it has, most of the great musical cues you hear from the original trilogy, like the Leia theme, the Empire theme, and stuff like that, and the whole Force thing. Like, you get all that classical music, but you also get you get also some prequel classics, like the whole, I can't remember what they call it, but the one they originally played at the end of Phantom Menace, the Duel of the Fates or whatever it was called, which is amazing, and they get a sort of remix of that, revamp of that. But in addition, it's like all of the emotional stuff, like the really powerful stuff when we get into Anakin's turn, his confrontation with Padme when they're arguing with each other, and also his sort of the tragic music when Anakin turns to the dark side and kills younglings, and towards the end when he's confronting Obi Wan, and when Obi Wan slices him up and he's burning alive, like the tragic music and the whole thing towards the end with Padme's death and everything. Like, the music is so fucking powerful. It's so good. But the best moment for me, in the entire franchise, is when Anakin's sort of sitting at the Jedi Council while Windu and all them had gone to arrest Palpatine, and he's just sitting there alone, and he's looking out, and he can see, they show Padme looking out from her apartment as well, and he's hearing the telepathic message from Palpatine saying, if I die, you're not going to be able to save Padme, and how that's sort of haunting him, and they had that music, that little haunting music that totally sells the scene, so much. That scene would be nothing without that powerful music. To me, that's the best musical piece in the entire franchise. That really gets me, it gets me teary-eyed just hearing that music, and it sells the scene, it sells the moment of just how conflicted Anakin is. And I think, to be fair to Hayden Christensen, I think he does a good acting job in that scene as well. But I think it's the music that really, really sells it. So, yeah, I think the music was just great, outstanding in this movie. But anyway, I think that's it. I think that's mainly everything I wanted to talk about with Revenge of the Sith. So my rating for Revenge of the Sith, out of 10, it's going to be a very strong 9. Excellent. And so I'll be honest, all day since I've seen this movie, I've been going back and forth in my head, arguing with myself whether I give this movie a 9 or a 10. And for a while I was like, no, I'm going to give it a 10. But then I was like, oh, maybe I should give it a 9. I don't know, maybe it's a 10. I'm going back and forth. And ultimately, when I think about all the flaws, the no, and the Yoda fucking off for no good reason, and the forced, oh, she died because she was sad, and the whole, oh, Luke, Leia, and how silly some of the stuff was earlier in the movie with the, Grievous is obviously a 2-dimensional villain, and yeah, I think there were other issues I had earlier in the film that I was just kind of blanking on at the moment. But yeah, overall, I do think it was amazing. But yeah, all those blemishes kind of, to me, I was like, I can't give it a 10 when it has all those blemishes on it. But it's still very close to a 10. It's still a very, very strong 9. Because I think what's good about the film really outweighs any of those blemishes. And I totally disagree with people who hate this film. I really strongly disagree. I think this is the second best Star Wars film. I think it is better in New Hope and it's better in Return of the Jedi. Just my humble opinion, but I really do. Because it has more emotional impact on me than any of those films. I think it's much more powerful, much more emotional. I think the tragedy of it really comes off extremely strongly in all aspects, and Anakin's relationship with Padme, Anakin's relationship with Obi Wan, how the Emperor manipulated the whole thing, and also how the Jedi kind of fucked up. They kind of mishandled, Windu and Yoda and all of them, they kind of mishandled the situation. They shouldn't have put Anakin with Palpatine in the first place, and they shouldn't have tried to manipulate Palpatine that way. Also, they should have just granted Anakin the thing of Master by sort of pushing him away. They kind of were pushing him towards the dark side. They kind of played right into Palpatine's hand, to be honest. Palpatine was manipulating everything, and they fell for it. So this should have been more powerful. And that's, by the way, the other show I was thinking of was Acolyte, which I do like better than most people, because especially watching this movie and seeing how flawed the Jedi was, that's kind of the point, that they were very flawed. They weren't this bastion of good that Obi-Wan was making out them to be in A New Hope. He was kind of looking at them through rose-colored glasses. And even in this film, Obi-Wan himself kind of fucked up a bit. So they were a bit corrupt, which was kind of the point that Lucas is going about, is the fact that they eroded, allowed this fascism to rise. And so it was interesting getting, especially in the scene when Palpatine's talking about Darth Plagueis, because that's kind of what Acolyte was setting up, is that Darth Plagueis and how he had the ability to create life, and that could be related to what we saw in the Acolyte with those witches being able to create life using the Force, and how I would have liked to see that show continue and actually connect the dots. But no, all these anti-woke fuckers thought it sucked. Well, it wasn't just the anti-woke crowd, to be fair, as a lot of other people who were being fair to Star Wars hated it too, which I don't get. Like, I don't get. I think it's not the best show ever. Like, I didn't like the ending of season 1. I think it kind of fizzled out. Like, it could have been better. But I still wanted to see it continue. But here's the thing, like, one of the main complaints people had about this show was, oh, it portrays the Jedi as kind of corrupt and whatever, and they're supposed to be the good guys or whatever. But actually that totally fits with how the Jedi are portrayed in the prequels, 100%. It makes sense that even Yoda, the bastion of good, even you can see in this film that he kind of makes some mistakes. And he's kind of not as smart as he thinks he is. Because if he was, he would not have allowed Palpatine to manipulate the Jedi so perfectly. So I think the Acolyte was on the right track. It did kind of stumble with that ending of season 1. But anyway, total other thing. And as I said, the music in this movie was amazing. It was the best music in the entire trilogy. Franchise, in all the trilogies. I think this is John Williams' best score. Like, it's just because, yeah, it was just so good. Anyway, yeah. So that is it for my review of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Happy May 4th. Thanks so much for watching this video. And I'll see you next year when I cover Force Awakens, which I will have a lot to say about. But in the meantime, check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek. If you're into Star Trek at all, got every episode, or doing every episode. I already got original series Next Generation down pat, and currently covering DS9 and Voyager. So, and plenty of other videos on Star Trek and many other shows and stuff as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.